Once you hit that $75,000 threshold, which back then was a strong, stable middle-class income, you've effectively bought yourself out of day-to-day financial anxiety.
Yeah,
But that's it.
precisely. And the implication there is profound.
The liver is the only human internal organ capable of natural regeneration of lost tissue mass. We are not talking about simple scar tissue repair. We are talking about regaining functional volume.
And the magnitude of this regenerative capacity is astounding in a clinical setting.
As little as 25% of a healthy liver can regenerate fully into a whole liver within a matter of months.
25.
The novice only looks at the opponent's last move and is just constantly reacting. But the grandmaster is thinking 5, 10 moves ahead, factoring in the opponent's whole strategy. And economists realize that assuming everyone was an eternal novice was, well, it was irrational. We live in a world that is, well, it's absolutely obsessed with quantification.
Completely.
We track our sleep, our steps, our heart rate zones, our portfolio performance, I mean, everything. But when you zoom out from all those micrometrics, what is the single ultimate measure that tells us if we are actually, succeeding at life?
That is the immeasurable yardstick, isn't it? The quality of life.
Right.
Everyone knows what a good quality of life, or QOL as researchers call it, feels like. But trying to define it objectively for, say, a government policy or a healthcare treatment plan, that means combining rock-solid financial data with the most ephemeral, personal, subjective human feelings. It's a real intellectual tightrope walk.
It is. And that's our mission today. We are taking a deep dive into the source material you provided to really unpack QOL. We want to understand the surprisingly diverse and sometimes conflicting ways that researchers and governments try to measure what makes a life worth living. We're giving you the shortcut to understanding what's truly behind those international rankings you always see in the news.
And to really set the foundation for this conversation, we have to start with the globally accepted benchmark. It comes from the World Health Organization.
The WHO.
Right. And this definition is crucial because it immediately shows you just how massive the scope of this concept is.
Okay, so let's hear the WHO definition.
The WHO defines quality of life as, and I'm quoting here, an individual's perception of their position in life in the context of the culture and value systems in which they live, and in relation to their goals, expectations, standards, and concerns.
Wow. Okay, when you read that, the word that jumps out is perception.
Yes.
It stretches so far beyond just simple economics. It's a definition that is inherently comparative and cultural.
Yeah.
It's not just about what you have, but how you feel about what you have relative to, your neighbor and your societal norms.
Precisely. And that breadth explains why QOL is this everything concept, the single idea. It spans these vast reports on international development. It informs how we assess patient care and healthcare.
Right.
It drives political debate over social spending, and it even influences workplace studies on, employee retention. If you are trying to measure human well-being anywhere, you're probably invoking quality of life.
And that inherent breadth, that's why researchers have spent decades trying to deliberately move beyond just standard financial metrics. Things like standard of living, GDP per capita, they're important.
Of course.
But they only tell a tiny fraction of the story. They capture economic potential, maybe, but they completely fail to capture the human experience itself.
That's the key distinction. If we look at the standard indicators, the inputs used by major organizations to gauge QOL, you see this wide ecosystem of data points that go far beyond just wealth.
So what's on that standard checklist? What are they looking at?
Well, the comprehensive list usually includes hard metrics like wealth and employment status, sure. But then it rapidly shifts into these more qualitative metrics, the quality of the environment, both physical and mental health, education access, recreation and leisure time, social belonging, safety, security, and of course the essential aspect of political freedom. And sometimes researchers even try to integrate religious beliefs or spiritual fulfillment depending on the culture.
That is a staggering amount of data to try and harmonize. It sounds like you'd need some kind of grand unified theory just to organize it all.
And people have tried.
Which brings us to the structure proposed in the Applied Research and the Quality of Life journal. I think it's often referred to as the engaged theory. This isn't just a checklist. It's more of a framework for how these elements interact.
It is. It's a genuinely comprehensive view. The engage theory, it posits that QOL can't be understood in isolation. It's seen through four core interlocking domains. You can think of them as the four pillars that hold up the quality of a human life.
And those four pillars are?
Ecology, economics, politics, and culture.
Okay, so ecology, that's your physical surroundings, environmental health. Makes sense. Economics, your financial stability, obviously. Politics covers governance, freedom, security. But that last one, culture, that's where the definition really, really deepens. It moves QOL so far beyond just the functional aspects of survival.
The culture domain is where that subjective reality from the WHO definition really lives. It recognizes that our perceived position in life is built on shared values and identity. The subdomains listed under culture are just. They're fascinating because they show the depth of this research.
Oh, walk us through some of those subdomains.
Certainly. So within culture, you find things like beliefs and ideas, which covers your moral and philosophical frameworks. Then there's creativity and recreation, so ensuring time for self-expression and leisure.
So it's not just about not being poor, it's about having time to paint or play soccer.
Exactly. It also includes inquiry and learning, so education and curiosity, gender and generations, addressing social equity, identity and engagement, so your self-worth and community participation. And this one is profound. Memory and projection.
Memory and projection, what does that mean?
It means your ability to reflect on your past and to plan for the future. And finally, well-being and health, which links back to your physical and mental status.
That is incredible. The fact that memory and projection, your relationship to history and the future, is an official metric of your quality of life under this theory. It demonstrates a fundamentally humanistic approach, not a purely materialistic one. But how on earth do you quantify something as abstract as identity and engagement?
Well, they typically use validated survey instruments. They employ, scaling questions. So for identity and engagement, a survey might ask something like, to what extent do you feel respected as an individual in your community on a scale of 1 to 10?
I see.
Or how often do you participate in collective decision-making? While the raw data is a number, the concept it's trying to capture is that qualitative feeling of purpose and inclusion.
That helps bridge that gap between the philosophical idea and the need for scalable data. But this leads us right into the biggest trap researchers face, the whole conundrum of happiness versus income.
Ah, yes.
We've established QOL goes beyond money, but how does the research formally separate money and happiness?
We have to be really clear here. Happiness, while it's part of QOL, is subjective and notoriously difficult to measure consistently across different people and time periods. And what's more, researchers found something that really challenges a core capitalist assumption.
Which is?
Happiness does not necessarily increase correspondingly with the comfort that comes from increasing income, especially after your basic needs are met.
So the marginal utility of wealth for just, being content,
Yeah.
it diminishes pretty rapidly.
Exactly. Therefore, the standard of living, which is a purely financial measure, like owning a certain car or a certain size house, it should not be automatically taken as a proxy for happiness. Once you achieve a certain level of financial stability, simply earning more money stops moving the needle on your daily contentment.
And that realization forced researchers to refine how they measure things, right? Which leads us to some fascinating modern distinctions in well-being.
It did.
Okay, let's unpack this distinction, because I think this is where the major aha moment happens for a lot of people. Researchers basically stopped looking for one big happy feeling and started looking for two different things.
Correct. When trying to quantify personal well-being today, researchers make a very clear separation between two distinct aspects.
The first one is emotional well-being.
Right.
This is your immediate lived emotional reality. It's the quality of your everyday emotional experiences. When they measure this, they're looking at the frequency and intensity of specific emotions you felt yesterday. Things like joy, stress, sadness, anger, affection. It's measured in the moment.
And the second aspect is totally distinct, life evaluation. This is more of a reflective judgment. Respondents are asked to step back from their daily grind, to think about their life in general, their achievements, goals, status, and evaluate against a scale.
Usually that 1 to 10 ladder scale, right?
Yeah.
Where 10 is the best possible life.
Exactly. The Cantrell letter scale. It's measured through conscious, considered reflection on your whole life trajectory.
So emotional well-being is how stressed I feel right now because I missed a deadline.
Yes.
And life evaluation is how I feel about my career in general. These are clearly two different mental processes.
They are. And the distinction is vital because these two measurements do not track together perfectly, especially as income goes up. This was demonstrated by that famous 2010 Princeton study.
Let's dive into that. The Princeton research on about 1,000 U.S. residents. How did income affect these two different types of well-being?
The findings were incredibly instructive. So let's start with life evaluation. Researchers found that life evaluations rise steadily with income with virtually no ceiling.
No ceiling at all.
Pretty much. The wealthier people were, the better they rated their lives against that 1 to 10 scale. It suggests that when people reflect on their status and their security, accumulating more wealth gives them a greater sense of achievement. It leads to higher life ratings, even for millionaires and billionaires.
So that aspirational goal of constantly improving your status is real, and it shows up in the life evaluation metric.
Absolutely. But now for the surprising part, which relates to the emotional daily experiences. They level off. The study found that the quality of people's reported daily emotions, so the frequency of joy, the reduction of sadness or stress, it hit a very obvious plateau.
What was that dollar figure threshold back in 2010?
It was approximately $75,000 per year. The study concluded that income above this level did not lead to significantly more experiences of daily happiness, nor did it offer further statistical relief from daily stress or sadness.
So once you hit that $75,000 threshold, which back then was a strong, stable middle-class income, you've effectively bought yourself out of day-to-day financial anxiety.
Yeah,
But that's it.
precisely. And the implication there is profound. Money can buy you the relief necessary to eliminate the emotional distress that poverty causes. Below that $75,000 level, respondents reported a sharp decrease in happiness and a stuck increase in daily stress. The researchers suggested the mechanism is that poverty exacerbates the pain of life's misfortunes.
Explain that. I mean, if you get divorced, divorce is painful no matter how much money you make.
That's true, but think about the operational reality of it. If you get a severe illness or your marriage ends, that is existential pain, no doubt. But if you're earning well above $75,000, you can hire support, you can take time off work, you can pay for excellent medical care without going bankrupt.
You can keep your house.
You can keep your house. The existential pain is there, but the daily emotional stress of choosing between medication and rent is gone.
But if you're below that security level, you're not just dealing with the grief of the divorce. You're simultaneously worrying about legal fees, losing insurance, potentially moving. The daily financial anxiety just compounds the existential stress.
Exactly. The $75,000 ceiling suggests that once you achieve the stability that removes that daily financial worry, you've hit the limit of money's ability to improve your daily life. Any more money might make you rate your life better on that ladder.
A higher life evaluation.
But it won't make you feel happier moment to moment. Your emotional well-being has plateaued.
That perfectly illustrates why QOL has to balance both the objective data financial stability and the subjective emotional reality. But taking these sophisticated measurements and scaling them up to compare entire countries, that's a whole different exercise in complexity.
Oh, it absolutely is. When we turn to the global benchmarks, you see researchers struggling to combine all these indicators. And the different major indices, they reflect fundamentally different priorities about what a good life should even entail.
Let's start with the big one, the standard, the one most commonly cited by development agencies, the Human Development Index, or HDI.
The HDI is the oldest and most commonly used measure from the UN Development Program. Its whole mission is to quantify the options available to individuals in a given society. It was specifically designed to push back against that old idea that GDP alone was the measure of a nation's success.
So what are the components the HDI combines?
It combines three main things: life expectancy at birth, which reflects health; education, measured by mean and expected years of schooling; and standard of living, which is quantified using gross national income per capita.
It's an attempt to get a three-pronged view of human capability.
Exactly. But there was a recognized limitation with the original HDI, right? It was seen as measuring a country's potential development, not necessarily the actual reality for the average person.
Right. If a country had massive wealth, but only for a tiny elite, the HDI score could still look pretty high.
That's correct. To address this, the UN introduced a crucial update back in 2010, the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or IHDI.
And what does the IHDI do that the standard HDI missed?
The IHDI measures the actual level of human development by accounting for inequality across those three dimensions: health, education, and income within the nation. You can think of the original HDI as the maximum level of development that could hypothetically be achieved if resources were perfectly distributed.
And the IHDI shows you what's actually happening on the ground.
It shows you what's being achieved when you consider the gap between the richest and poorest. If a wealthy country has a high HDI but significant internal disparities in healthcare and income, its IHDI score will drop, reflecting a lower actual quality of life for most people.
That's a powerful tool. It lets policymakers see the cost of inequality in real terms.
It is. Now, if we shift gears, we can look at a measure that explicitly prioritizes that subjective feeling we discussed earlier, the World Happiness Report.
Okay, so this one leans into the happiness side of things.
It embraces the subjective component wholeheartedly. It ranks about 156 countries by reported happiness, viewing happiness as the ultimate outcome of a high QOL.
How do they calculate something so seemingly qualitative on a global scale?
It's a really smart hybrid model. It relies heavily on the Gallup World Poll surveys to capture that subjective feeling, usually using the life evaluation ladder we talked about. But it combines that feeling with 6 key objective factors.
And what are those 6 input?
They are GDP per capita, healthy life expectancy, social support, and this is a big one, defined as having someone to count on in times of trouble.
I can see how that would drive daily emotional well-being.
Hugely. Then there's perceived freedom to make life choices, freedom from corruption, and generosity. It synthesizes the objective signs of a stable, healthy society with the subjective experience of feeling supported and free.
That's a very comprehensive effort to bridge that objective-subjective gap.
It is. But if we shift priorities again, we can move away from wealth and even immediate happiness and introduce a new variable, accountability. And that's where we find the most revolutionary metric, the Happy Planet Index, or HPI.
This one really throws a wrench in the works, doesn't it? By insisting that a good life must also be a sustainable one. What makes the HPI so unique?
It fundamentally reframes what success even means. While it does use standard components of well-being, the HPI includes each country's ecological footprint as a non-negotiable fundamental indicator.
So it's not just about how happy and long your life is, but how efficiently you achieve that.
Precisely. It calculates the efficiency with which nations convert natural resources into long and happy lives. It actively penalizes nations that achieve a high QOL at the expense of unsustainable consumption.
Which means the results are transformative.
Oh, completely. European and North American nations, which usually dominate the HDI and other QOL indices, they plummet down the HPI list. Their high standards of living require a massive, unsustainable ecological footprint.
So who ends up at the top of the HPI list?
Well, the 2012 list was led by countries like Costa Rica, Vietnam, and Colombia. These nations were managing to achieve relatively high well-being and life expectancy while operating with a significantly lower environmental impact. The HPI forces you to ask, is a high QOL truly desirable if it consumes the ability of future generations to enjoy that same quality of life?
That is a fundamental challenge to the global model of endless economic growth. Before we move on, we should briefly touch on a predecessor to these, the Physical Quality of Life Index, or PQLI.
Yes, the PQLI was an important precursor back in the 70s. It was an early effort to argue that economic metrics like GNP were just insufficient.
Why?
The creators argued that GNP was too dependent on inflation and trade imbalances to really reflect social welfare. So they focused exclusively on the absolute basics of survival and education.
Yes, where?
Basic literacy rate, infant mortality rate, and life expectancy at age 1. The goal was to paint a less fatalistic picture than the economic data showed. It has largely been replaced by the HDI, but it set the precedent that QOL must be measured by social welfare, not just income.
And we're still seeing this evolution today with even more specialized indices, like the Social Progress Index and the Digital Quality of Life Index.
Exactly. The Social Progress Index is explicitly designed to measure social and environmental needs that GDP and HDI miss. It looks at 52 indicators covering things like access to basic knowledge, sanitation, tolerance, and inclusion.
And the Digital Quality of Life Index speaks to our modern infrastructure needs.
It does. It measures digital well-being across 5 pillars: internet affordability, internet quality, e-infrastructure, e-security, and e-government. It's a recognition that in the 21st century, reliable, secure, affordable internet is becoming a fundamental human need. It's integral to all the other pillars of QOL.
That's a powerful overview of the macro level. Now let's bring QOL down to the ground level and see how it's applied in 2 dramatically different fields: individual health and city management. Starting with QOL in healthcare, or HRQOL.
Right. When we talk about health-related quality of life, the focus shifts completely from national averages to the unique individual patient experience. HRQOL is not just about measuring if a patient is alive. It's an evaluation of how a specific ailment, a terminal illness, a chronic disease affects their ability to function and enjoy life.
That seems like you'd need a more philosophical definition for that, and that's what the University of Toronto's Quality of Life Research Unit tried to provide.
They did. Their model defines QOL in this context as the degree to which a person enjoys the important possibilities of his or her life. Now, that sounds abstract, but they make it very actionable by breaking it down into 3 domains.
Let's break down that Toronto model: being, belonging, and becoming.
Okay, so being focuses on the individual's core identity, who you are. This includes physical being, so health and mobility, psychological being, things like self-esteem and control, and spiritual being, so your values, your purpose, your hope.
Then you have belonging, which is the connection to the external world.
Correct. Belonging is how you're connected to your environment. This covers physical belonging, like your home and neighborhood, social belonging, your relationships and family support, and community belonging, so access to resources, engagement in work, or education.
And finally, the domain that addresses personal growth, which disease can so often restrict: becoming.
Becoming relates to achieving your personal goals and aspirations. It's about the future. This has 3 parts. Practical becoming, like daily tasks and work. Leisure becoming, so hobbies and relaxation. And growth becoming, which is about learning and adapting.
That framework allows a doctor to gauge the holistic impact of a treatment. It's not just about whether your vital signs are stable, but can you still engage with your family, pursue hobbies, maintain your self-esteem?
Exactly. And that framework is also why many clinicians use a simpler alternative measure, defining HRQOL as the patient's ability to enjoy normal life activities. It's a focus on function as a proxy for QOL. Can the patient dress themselves? Can they interact socially? Can they work?
Now let's scale that concept up to the community level. QOL in urban livability and crime. QOL is the central yardstick used by economists and politicians to measure the livability of a city.
Right, those livability rankings you see, the ones that often put a city like Vienna at the top, they combine objective data infrastructure, public transit, with subjective resident satisfaction surveys. They're designed to inform urban policy.
But within urban policy, especially around safety and crime, QOL takes on a very specific and highly controversial meaning. This brings us to the sociological argument known as the broken windows theory.
The broken windows theory, first put forward by James Q. Wilson and George Kelling, is based on a deceptively simple idea that if minor signs of disorder are left unaddressed, they create an atmosphere that invites more serious crime.
So we're talking about things that degrade a neighborhood's quality of life: litter, broken streetlights, graffiti, public drinking, minor stuff.
Exactly. The core assertion is that these visible signs of decay, they signal to residents that the community lacks social controls, that the authorities don't care. If one broken window is left unfixed, the neighborhood starts to assume that disorder is tolerated, and people who might commit serious crimes see the area as, ripe for the picking.
This theory had massive real-world implications, particularly in American cities during the 1990s.
Oh, absolutely. The most famous implementation was in New York City in the mid-90s under Mayor Rudolph Giuliani and Commissioner William Bratton. They enacted these aggressive zero-tolerance policies.
What did that mean in practice?
It meant strictly policing minor quality-of-life crimes like turnstile jumping, aggressive panhandling, public urination. The argument was that by aggressively addressing these small signs of disorder, they were improving the quality of life for everyone and preventing larger crimes from happening.
And crime rates did fall dramatically across the U.S. during that time.
They did. However, this approach has faced significant and I think necessary criticism. Critics argue that zero-tolerance policies, by refusing to treat cases individually, lead to disproportionately harsh penalties for minor infractions, and that those policies disproportionately affect certain demographic and minority groups.
It's the ultimate balancing act of QOL, isn't it? You're improving one group's subjective feeling of security and cleanliness, but potentially degrading another group's quality of life, their freedom, their exposure to the justice system.
That is the tension, exactly. It's a powerful demonstration that a policy aimed at improving QOL for the average person can simultaneously introduce significant harm to the QOL of the marginalized.
Finally, let's look briefly at QOL in international development. We've touched on it with the HDI, but how do major organizations formally use QOL to structure their missions?
Well, for massive institutions like the World Bank, QOL is intrinsically tied to the concept of poverty. Their stated goal is working for a world free of poverty, and they define poverty as a low quality of life.
So it's not just a lack of money.
No, they define it as a lack of basic human needs. Food, water, shelter, access to education, healthcare, and critically, freedom and the opportunity for employment. So for them, every poverty reduction program is, by definition, a QOL improvement initiative.
That makes sense.
But you see a fundamental difference when you look at many non-governmental organizations or NGOs. While the World Bank focuses on national economic policy, many NGOs work on a micro level, focusing on improving QOL for specific individuals or communities.
Like child sponsorship programs.
Precisely. They provide material aid, access to water, education, directly to a specific person or family. It's a shift from a statistical abstraction to a lived reality. It aligns perfectly with that subjective individual perception in the WHO definition.
And this emphasis on an individual's basic rights to health, food, shelter, it's become a bigger part of international politics, too.
It has. Stressing human security, measured by these QOL factors, has become a way for global health and human rights concerns to gain more political presence on the international stage. It creates a moral imperative.
Okay, let's try to synthesize what we've uncovered in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We started by defining quality of life as this mix of objective reality and subjective perception. It has to be more than just wealth.
We saw how the engaged theory expanded that into 4 core domains: ecology, economics, politics, and culture, with cultural elements like identity and memory being official metrics of a good life.
And we established that modern distinction between our daily emotional reality, our emotional well-being, and our thoughtful assessment of our life evaluation. The key data point there was the $75,000 threshold.
Right.
Which showed that while more money helps you rate your life higher, it stops buying you out of daily emotional distress once basic financial security is achieved.
And globally, we saw that the definition of QOL depends entirely on the criteria you choose. The HDI prioritizes potential and education. The World Happiness Report prioritizes social connection, and the Happy Planet Index reframes everything by insisting on environmental sustainability.
Finally, we looked at QOL in practice. We saw how the Toronto model guides healthcare professionals to measure the holistic impact of disease, and how in cities, theories like broken windows attempt to mandate a higher quality of life, which leads to profound policy changes and ongoing debate.
It just confirms that QOL is this dynamic, shifting, sometimes contradictory concept. What a nation measures with an index like the IHDI is often distinct from what an individual feels moment to moment. The challenge is always how to align those two perspectives without losing depth.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you to mull over. We mentioned that one method for measuring happiness, the day reconstruction method, has declined in use.
Right. That's the one where subjects meticulously recall their previous day and describe their mood during each activity.
It provided incredibly nuanced data, a real depth of insight into where people felt joy or stress. So why did it decline?
Because it required significant effort and thoughtful interpretation from the respondents. It was essentially abandoned for being too effortful and not as scalable as, say, a single 1 to 10 life evaluation question.
So here's the question we want to leave you with. Since researchers often prioritize simple, fast, scalable data, what does that say about the trade-off we're all accepting? Do we, as a society, knowingly sacrifice true understanding of individual, detailed, lived experience for the sake of easily repeatable, quick, but potentially surface-level data?
Something to ponder as you reflect on your own position in life and what truly contributes to your own quality of life.
We will catch you on the next Deep Dive.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we are focusing on an organ that manages so much of your essential chemistry that we tend to ignore it entirely. Until, of course, that extraordinary workload finally becomes too much.
It really does.
We are going inside the body's most complex structure, the liver.
It is the definition of a workhorse and, frankly, an engineering marvel. This is a major metabolic organ exclusively found in vertebrates, and it is universally and accurately described as the body's chemical factory.
I think we need to establish the scale right away because when we say chemical factory, we're not talking about a small workshop.
Not at all.
We're talking about functionality, estimates that hover around 500 separate, distinct biological functions.
500 is just the number that scientists usually settle on. But if you start listing every single enzyme activity or regulatory step, that number could easily balloon further.
Wow.
It's an unprecedented level of diversity and function for a single organ. And physically, it is absolutely essential.
It's huge, right?
It is the heaviest internal organ and the largest gland you possess, typically weighing in at about 1.5 kilograms or, 3.3 pounds in an adult.
And it is positioned perfectly for its job, tucked away safely beneath the diaphragm in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen. It's almost like the main control panel of your system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the central importance of this organ is underscored by one truly sobering fact that everyone really needs to know.
What's that?
Currently, there is no artificial organ or technological device that can reproduce all of its functions. None. We can mimic kidney function with dialysis. We can assist cardiac function. But for complete, irreversible liver failure, transplantation remains the only viable long-term solution. That reality, I think, speaks volumes about the complexity we are about to unpack.
So our mission today is to truly understand how this is possible. How does one massive reddish-brown organ manage 500 functions while simultaneously regulating blood pressure, metabolism, and immunity?
It's a tall order.
We're going to dive into the architecture that supports this complexity, explore its unique dual circulatory system, discuss its mythological power of regeneration, and see how this chemical powerhouse also managed to worm its way into human language and ancient lore. Let's start with the physical structure. When we see this wedge-shaped mass, how is it organized internally to handle the body's entire metabolic output? I understand the superficial divisions into two lobes. The right and left don't tell the functional story at all.
That's exactly right. The division by the falciform ligament into right and left lobes is just a surface feature. Surgeons and clinicians, when they're planning any intervention, they completely ignore that and move immediately to the functional organization.
And what system do they rely on for that kind of surgical precision?
They rely on the Kuhn classification system. This system is pivotal because it divides the liver not by external shape, but into 8 functionally independent segments.
Functionally independent.
Yeah, think of it as mapping the internal plumbing.
That phrase, functionally independent, is key. How does that translate into actual surgical utility?
It means that each of those 8 segments has its own dedicated, separate vascular inflow, outflow, and biliary drainage.
So it's like 8 little mini livers all packed together?
In a way, yes. If a tumor, for example, is confined to segment 7, a surgeon can isolate the blood and bile supply specifically to segment 7, remove it, and the remaining 7 segments continue to function completely normally.
That's incredible.
It allows for these highly complex, life-saving partial hepatectomies that just wouldn't be possible if the entire organ shared one integrated vascular tree.
So it's designed with built-in redundancy and modularity, which is incredible. And I remember one segment is particularly unique in its supply.
That's Unit 1, which corresponds roughly to the caudate lobe. It's distinct because it receives blood flow from both the right and left-sided vascular branches.
Oh, interesting. So it's double fed.
Which makes its blood supply particularly robust and somewhat resistant to damage that might affect the other lobes.
Beyond this large-scale segmentation, what is the organ physically encased in?
The liver is wrapped tightly in a thin, strong layer of fibroelastic connective tissue, known as Glisson's capsule.
Glisson's capsule?
Right, named after Dr. Francis Glisson. This capsule extends deep into the organ, accompanying the blood vessels and bile ducts, essentially holding the soft liver tissue under constant, mild pressure. It's a crucial anatomical feature covering the entire organ except for the small bare area where it attaches directly to the diaphragm.
Okay, let's turn to the circulatory system because this is where the liver's job description truly becomes unique. The dual blood supply. Why does this chemical factory need 2 completely separate sources of incoming blood?
Well, it needs 2 sources because it has 2 very different jobs that require different kinds of input.
Okay.
One job is processing and filtering, and the other is maintaining its own massive energy needs. These jobs require different blood types, so to speak.
Let's talk about the processing blood first.
That comes via the hepatic portal vein. This vein provides the lion's share, approximately 75% of the total blood flow to the liver.
75%.
And crucially, this is venous blood, meaning it is low in oxygen. However, it is rich in everything else. It drains the entire gastrointestinal tract, the spleen, and the pancreas. It is carrying all the recently absorbed nutrients, all the toxins, all the medications, and all the waste products directly from the gut.
So that 75% of flow is essentially the raw material and the contamination that the factory needs to handle immediately before it can be distributed to the rest of the body.
Exactly. It's the contaminated feedstock. The other 25% comes from the hepatic artery.
Okay.
This is high-pressure arterial blood, full of oxygen, derived directly from the aorta. This supply is purely for the massive energy needs of the liver cells themselves.
Here is where the physiological ingenuity really shines. Even though the portal vein carries 3 times the volume of the arterial supply, the actual oxygen supplied to the hepatocytes is split roughly 50-50 between the two sources. Why is that specific balance so vital?
That 50-50 oxygen split is a perfect adaptation to safeguard the liver. Hepatocytes are incredibly metabolically active. They are running those 500 chemical functions, so they need constant high-volume oxygen.
Right.
The portal vein's composition can fluctuate wildly depending on whether you just ate a massive meal or are fasting. If the liver relied solely on the portal vein, the oxygen supply would be too unstable.
I see.
By pulling 50% of the oxygen from the steady, high-pressure arterial system, the liver protects its metabolic machinery from those wild variations in the portal blood supply.
That makes perfect sense. It's a system designed for stability under dynamic conditions. Now let's zoom into the functional core, the microscopic units where this massive mixing and processing actually occurs.
That happens in the hepatic lobules, which are the actual functional units of the liver. They are typically conceptualized as roughly hexagonal shapes.
Right.
These lobules are built primarily of plates of hepatocytes, the liver cells, which make up 70–85% of the organ's volume, all radiating outwards from a central vein.
And what are the essential structures at the corners of those hexagonal units?
That is the portal triad. This triad is an absolutely essential structure because it brings the 3 key systems together at the edge of the lobule.
And what's in it?
It consists of a branch of the portal vein, a branch of the hepatic artery, and a small common bile duct. Blood flows from the triad inwards, past the hepatocytes, toward the central vein. Bile flows outwards, toward the periphery.
And for anyone who has ever had to have their liver scanned, there is a fun visual aid used in diagnosis for this triad.
Yes, radiologists often call the portal triad the Mickey Mouse sign on an ultrasound image.
The Mickey Mouse sign.
Yes. The branch of the portal vein is the largest, representing the head, and the smaller, round hepatic artery branch and the bile duct branch are often seen flanking it, resembling the ears.
That's a great visual.
It's a simple, memorable sign that confirms the essential functional plumbing is in place during diagnostic imaging.
So, to summarize the architecture, the liver is segmented for surgical precision, protected by a capsule, powered by a highly stable dual oxygen supply, and organized microscopically into millions of processing units that ensure every molecule passing through is immediately presented to the functional cells.
Precisely. This intricate layering of protection, supply, and segmentation is what allows the hepatocytes to perform their biochemical marathon without interruption.
Now we move from the structure to the action. If the liver performs 500 functions, we can't cover them all, but we must discuss its metabolic mastery, how it regulates our entire energy system. Let's start with carbohydrates, where the liver acts as the body's ultimate energy bank and regulator.
It is the absolute key to maintaining stable blood sugar. The liver does 3 essential things with glucose, and they are all tightly regulated by hormones like insulin and glucagon.
Okay, first, the storage function.
It stores glucose as glycogen, a process called glycogenesis. It usually keeps about 100 grams of glycogen tucked away, ready for immediate energy needs.
And second, when energy is needed, it acts as a supplier.
It releases glucose back into the bloodstream through glycogenolysis, which is just breaking down glycogen. These 2 functions, storage and release, keep your blood sugar stable between meals.
But the real ingenuity, the process that keeps you alive during starvation or intense exercise, is making glucose from scratch. And there are 2 ways it does this, which we need to clearly distinguish.
Absolutely. The broader process is gluconeogenesis, the synthesis of new glucose from non-carbohydrate sources.
So not from sugar.
Right. This means taking building blocks like amino acids, which can come from broken down muscle protein, or glycerol from broken down fats, and chemically creating usable glucose from them. This is essential for feeding the brain when dietary glucose is absent.
And the second, more specific creation process.
That is glyconeogenesis, and it's a brilliant recycling effort. This is the synthesis of glycogen from lactic acid, or lactate.
Ah, the stuff you get from a hard workout.
Exactly. When your muscles work anaerobically, say during a sprint, they produce lactate. The liver sucks up that lactate from the blood and converts it back into glycogen or glucose, making that energy available again. So the liver is constantly managing, storing, breaking down, and creating energy sources.
Moving to proteins, this function is perhaps the most critical for maintaining the mechanical integrity of the body. The liver doesn't just manage energy, it manufactures our structural and communication elements,
It synthesizes virtually all plasma proteins except the gamma globulins.
which are the antibodies.
Right, those are made by immune cells. But if you consider the other proteins essential for life, the liver makes them.
The most critical example of this manufacturing is blood clotting. What happens if the liver fails in this regard?
You bleed uncontrollably. The liver synthesizes all the major coagulation factors, factors I through 13, as well as regulatory proteins like protein C, protein S, and antithrombin.
Instead of listing all 13, let's focus on the two most essential factors the listener needs to remember.
Okay, focus on factor 1, which is fibrinogen, and factor 2, which is prothrombin.
Right.
Prothrombin is an inactive enzyme that the liver produces. It's dependent on vitamin K. When activated, prothrombin turns into thrombin, which then converts fibrinogen into fibrin. Fibrin is the physical, sticky mesh that forms the basis of the blood clot. Without the liver, that mesh cannot form.
This complexity underscores the link between liver health and bleeding disorders. And then there's albumin, which we mentioned earlier regarding fluid balance. Why is albumin so vital, and what does its absence look like?
Albumin is the most abundant serum protein in your bloodstream, and the liver is its sole source. Its main job is maintaining what we call oncotic pressure.
Leeches.
It's the osmotic force exerted by proteins that keeps fluid contained within your blood vessels. When the liver fails and albumin synthesis drops, that pressure drops.
And if that pressure drops, the fluid leaks out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This leads to severe fluid accumulation, most visibly as swelling in the ankles and feet, but often dramatically as ascites.
That's the fluid in the abdomen.
Yes, the collection of fluid in the abdominal cavity. This symptom is a direct, visible consequence of the liver failing its manufacturing duties. The liver also synthesizes thrombopoietin, a hormone that regulates platelet production, furthering its role in blood management.
Finally, before moving to detoxification, let's briefly mention lipids.
The liver is central to fat management. It synthesizes cholesterol, a necessary component for hormones and cell membranes. It performs lipogenesis, which is fat creation, and it produces triglycerides and lipoproteins, which are necessary packages for transporting fats through the bloodstream.
And bile.
And crucially, it creates and excretes bile, which acts as a detergent to emulsify dietary fats so they can be absorbed in the intestine.
So that covers metabolism, but the other critical side of the factory is dealing with poisons and waste, the detoxification and excretion roles.
This is where its role as the body's ultimate filter comes in. The liver is the primary site for drug metabolism, using a massive suite of enzymes to modify toxic substances in medicinal products. The goal is always to make them water-soluble so they can be flushed out.
But the process of detoxification sometimes carries a risk of making things worse, which is a scary concept.
It is. It's the inherent risk of toxication. While the liver usually makes a substance less dangerous, sometimes the resulting metabolite, the chemical byproduct of the breakdown, is actually more reactive and more toxic than the precursor substance.
Wow.
This is why drug dosing and liver health are so tightly linked.
And the essential waste management job dealing with ammonia from protein breakdown is literally a life-saving function.
Ammonia is a highly neurotoxic byproduct of amino acid metabolism. If it builds up, it causes hepatic encephalopathy, impacting brain function severely.
So the liver prevents that.
It prevents this crisis by running the ornithine, or urea cycle, which chemically converts that highly toxic ammonia into relatively non-toxic urea. The urea can then be safely passed out of the body in the urine. This conversion process is constantly running.
Let's dedicate a moment to what you call the unseen roles, the functions that happen quietly in the background but are indispensable, starting with its function as a stress valve for the circulatory system.
Yes, the liver acts as an expandable blood reservoir. In a healthy person, it holds about 450 milliliters of blood, close to 10% of total body volume.
Okay.
But because its channels are highly compliant, if pressure builds up in the cardiovascular system, say during right-sided cardiac failure, the liver can swell significantly and store an extra half liter to a full liter of blood.
It's acting like a massive, flexible balloon that can absorb circulatory stress. What about its contribution to the lymphatic system?
This is a surprise to many. Due to the unique structure of its capillaries, fluid and proteins pass readily out of the bloodstream. Consequently, the liver is the single largest source of lymphatic fluid.
The largest?
It's responsible for generating about half of all lymph formed in the body under resting conditions.
Half. That is a monumental contribution. And finally, let's talk about that long-term storage capacity.
It is the ultimate internal pantry. The liver stores various essential minerals, but its vitamin stores are unparalleled. For vitamin A, it holds a generous 1 to 2 year supply.
A 2-year supply.
But even more remarkable is its capacity for vitamin B12. It stores a massive 3 to 5 year supply.
What's the clinical implication of that 3 to 5 year B12 storage?
It means that if a person stops absorbing B12, say due to pernicious anemia or a dietary change, they won't necessarily show signs of deficiency for years. This incredible buffer complicates diagnosis and highlights just how long the liver can sustain essential functions.
And let's not forget the frontline defense cells within this factory.
The liver is packed with specialized resident immune cells called Kupffer cells. These are large macrophages that line the sinusoids. Their job is to actively purify the blood coming from the gut, engulfing and removing dead cells, bacteria, and other junk before that blood reaches the general circulation.
They're the quality control team.
The ultimate quality control team for everything you absorb.
Given this enormous portfolio of 500 functions, when the liver begins to fail, the entire system is thrown into chaos. Let's look at the clinical reality, starting with the disease landscape.
The scale of chronic liver disease today is, it's alarming. The most common form globally is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD.
Right, NAFLD.
It's closely linked to metabolic syndrome, obesity, and diabetes. It is estimated to affect 1/3 of the world population.
1/3 is a stunning figure, but viral causes still lead to the most severe outcomes.
Absolutely. While there are 5 types of viral hepatitis, A through E, chronic infection with hepatitis B or hepatitis C is the primary global cause of cirrhosis and liver cancer.
When the liver's metabolic and filtration jobs begin to fail, the symptoms we see are a direct result of the chemical imbalances we just discussed. Let's revisit bilirubin and its immediate clinical consequence.
Failure to process bilirubin, the byproduct of broken down red blood cells, leads directly to jaundice, which is the yellowing of the skin and eyes,
And itching.
and severe itching, or pruritus. Bilirubin is normally excreted via bile. When this fails, its buildup leads to intense, often debilitating itching that is notoriously difficult to treat.
And linking back to albumin, the fluid accumulation issues.
When albumin production halts, oncotic pressure fails, leading to generalized swelling and ascites, that accumulation of fluid in the abdomen. This can become so severe that patients require painful, frequent draining procedures.
Even the digestive system shows the failure.
Yes. Pale, clay-colored stools are a telltale sign. This happens because the liver is failing to excrete the bilirubin metabolites necessary to create stercobilin, the pigment that normally colors the stool brown.
If the factory is shut down, the color disappears.
Exactly, the plumbing is blocked.
But the clinical reality leads us straight to the most fascinating biological fact about the liver, its mythological power of regeneration.
It truly is unique. The liver is the only human internal organ capable of natural regeneration of lost tissue mass. We are not talking about simple scar tissue repair. We are talking about regaining functional volume.
And the magnitude of this regenerative capacity is astounding in a clinical setting.
It is. Clinically, surgeons often rely on the fact that as little as 25% of a healthy liver can regenerate fully into a whole liver within a matter of months.
25%.
It's fundamental to successful transplantation and resection.
Now, let's ensure the listener understands the critical biological caveat. In mammals, this isn't the same as true regeneration. What is the correct term?
We call it compensatory growth.
Okay.
The function and mass are restored, which is what matters clinically. However, true regeneration, where the original complex architectural shape and lobe structure are perfectly restored, as you might see in a zebrafish liver, that does not occur in humans.
So if you remove the right lobe,
The remaining left lobe will expand to compensate for the lost volume, but you don't regrow the missing right lobe in its original form.
how does this compensatory growth happen at the cellular level?
It's largely driven by the mature hepatocytes re-entering the cell cycle. Hepatocytes are normally quiescent, just sitting patiently in the G0 phase.
Just doing their jobs.
Right. When a large portion of the liver mass is suddenly removed, powerful growth signals flood the remaining tissue. These signals force the quiescent hepatocytes to transition into the G1 phase and start dividing rapidly until the original total mass and function are restored.
It's an internal emergency protocol. And this amazing ability takes us straight back to ancient Greek mythology.
Yes, the myth of the Titan Prometheus. His eternal punishment by Zeus involved being chained to a rock, where an eagle would arrive daily to devour his liver.
Only for it to regenerate completely overnight, ready for the next day's torment.
Exactly. This suggests that the ancient Greeks, likely through observing animal anatomy or maybe ritual sacrifice, had at least a conceptual, if not clinical, awareness of the liver's incredible ability to grow back.
Bringing this to modern intervention, we established that transplantation is the only option for complete failure. But regeneration allows for a highly complex procedure, living donor transplantation.
This procedure is a testament to the liver's capacity. It involves removing a portion of a healthy living donor's liver and placing it in the recipient. Both the donor's remaining liver and the transplanted portion in the recipient will regenerate to near full capacity.
When performing adult-to-adult living donor procedures, what portion of the donor liver is typically removed, and what complexity does this add?
Surgeons usually take the right hepatic lobe, which is substantial. It constitutes about 60% of the donor's total liver mass.
60%.
Yeah, so this procedure is more controversial and carries greater inherent risks for the donor than the smaller left-sided donation typically used for children. The entire procedure requires obsessive preoperative planning.
We spoke about the 8 functional Kuno segments earlier. I imagine non-invasive imaging is absolutely crucial for mapping those segments and the delicate vascular tree before cutting.
It is non-negotiable. Living donors undergo detailed pre-surgical screening using CT scans to map the vascular anatomy and calculate the exact volume, and MRI to map the biliary tree anatomy.
So you have to make sure the plumbing will work.
You have to screen out any donor with unusual vascular or biliary plumbing that would make the procedure too dangerous for either party. It's a precise calculation where functional segments, blood supply, and regenerative potential must align perfectly.
We've spent most of our deep dive establishing the liver as a functional masterpiece of chemistry and biology. But historically, humans weren't thinking about glucose or coagulation factors. They were thinking about emotion, spirit, and destiny. How did this organ become so tied to deep human feeling?
It's a remarkable example of anatomical significance driving cultural meaning. Because the liver is the largest, darkest, and most blood-rich internal organ, ancient cultures naturally attributed immense power to it. Some primitive cultures literally regarded the liver as the seat of the soul.
And in classical philosophy, the liver represented the darker, more visceral aspects of humanity.
Exactly. Plato believed the liver was the mirror of the soul, designed by the gods to reflect the appetites and emotions rising from the lower belly, acting as a warning signal. It was thought to be the seat of wrath, jealousy, and greed.
Right, the dark emotions.
And the Talmud later reinforced this, stating the liver was the seat of anger.
And this visceral, emotional linkage is cemented in our modern language, though often in contradictory ways. Let's start with the one most English speakers recognize. Lily-livered.
The term lily-livered, meaning cowardly, comes directly from the medieval belief that the liver was the seat of courage and passion.
So a lily, a white or pale flower,
meant a pale liver, suggesting a lack of blood, heat, or vitality, and thus a profound lack of courage or bravery.
But traveling geographically, the connotations of the liver are overwhelmingly positive.
Very much so. In Persian, Urdu, and Hindi, the word for the liver is jigar. This term is used figuratively to indicate intense bravery, heart, or strong passion.
Oh, that's interesting.
A common term of profound endearment is Johnny Jigar, which literally translates to the life or strength of my liver. It is a measure of essential, vital connection.
And we see that same connection to courage in Africa.
In the Zulu language, the word for liver, isibindi, is used interchangeably with the word for courage. The organ and the concept are one and the same. It shows a cross-cultural, intuitive understanding that this massive, essential organ must be the source of vital energy and boldness.
There is also a fascinating linguistic legacy concerning food, specifically how the anatomical word for liver in Romance languages evolved.
This is one of my favorite linguistic tidbits. The modern anatomical word for liver in Romance languages, French foie, Spanish hígado, does not derive from the standard Latin anatomical term jacur.
Okay, so where does it come from?
Instead, they derive from the culinary Latin term ficcatum.
And ficata means what?
It literally means stuffed with figs.
Stuffed with figs.
Yes. This refers to the ancient Roman practice of stuffing geese or pigs with figs to purposefully fatten the animals and produce an enlarged, rich, fatty liver. This culinary term, ficcatum, became so dominant in the common vernacular that it completely replaced the original anatomical term, giving us the basis for modern words for the delicacy we call foie gras.
It's incredible that a specific indulgent culinary practice centuries ago has permanently shaped the anatomy vocabulary of half a continent. Finally, let's revisit the highly peculiar anthropological puzzle, the giraffe liver mystery.
This story comes from the Hummer tribe in Sudan, who are known for their traditional giraffe hunting. They make a peculiar preparation called nyolok,
Which is?
a non-alcoholic concoction derived from giraffe liver and bone marrow.
And what are the claimed effects?
The Hummer claim this drink is highly intoxicating. They describe the experience using the Arabic term sakran, and it allegedly causes vivid dreams and waking hallucinations.
Whoa.
Furthermore, they believe it compels the drinker to return to giraffe hunting, instilling a deep, almost addictive drive for the hunt.
That is highly counterintuitive for an organ-based food preparation. If it's not alcoholic, what is going on?
The initial skepticism was high. An anthropologist studying the tribe in the late 1950s suggested the intoxicating effect might be simply a matter of convention, meaning it was cultural expectation and ritual driving the experience.
But in the last few decades, speculation has focused on a potential chemical explanation, hasn't it?
Yes. Given the reports of vivid psychoactive effects, some scientific circles speculate that the preparation might contain potent hallucinogenic compounds, such as N,N-dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, concentrated in the giraffe liver.
The chemical factory in the animal is producing its own hallucinogen. It's a possibility. It certainly aligns with the liver's theme of being deeply intertwined with the human psyche. However, it's essential to be impartial here. While the story is compelling, detailed chemical analyses have yet to definitively prove or disprove the presence of such psychoactive compounds. It remains a powerful cultural narrative that ties the functional organ directly to profoundly altered mental states. This deep dive shows that the liver is far more than just a filter. We've explored its precise, modular architecture, its unique system of blood supply, and its phenomenal capability to regenerate. It truly earns its title as the most functionally diverse organ in the body.
It's the central regulator, the manufacturer, and the detoxification system, all wrapped into one 1.5 kilogram organ. And what is most compelling is the way ancient and modern thought converge on the idea that this ultimate chemical factory, the organ that manages every single thing we consume and synthesize, is fundamentally tied to our psychological state. From anger and wrath to courage and heart. The ancients, perhaps intuitively, understood that when the physical processes of the body are out of balance, the mind and spirit cannot be stable.
Which leaves us with this final thought prompt for you. Given the liver regulates nearly everything we absorb, synthesize, and detoxify, and knowing its historical association with our darkest emotions as well as our greatest courage, what new perspectives does this knowledge give us on the essential link between physical health and psychological state?
That's a great question.
If the liver is controlling the entire internal chemical environment, should we be focusing more on the health of this critical chemical factory when we discuss emotional balance, mood regulation, and mental clarity? Think about that 500 function workload the next time you consider what it truly means to be well inside and out.
Okay, so imagine this. Imagine stepping onto like an economic battlefield. But on this battlefield, every single participant, you've got the investor, the consumer, the business owner, they're not just smart.
They're more than smart. They possess something you might call perfect economic foresight.
Exactly. Not a crystal ball, but they act as if they have access to the absolute best information, the most, sophisticated economic models. And this is the critical part. They never, ever make the same systematic mistake twice.
It really does sound a bit like science fiction, doesn't it? It's that ideal of Homo economicus taken to its absolute extreme. But this hyper-rational person is the foundational idea of rational expectations, or RE.
And it wasn't just some small tweak to economic theory.
Oh no, it was an intellectual revolution. It completely changed how we view government policy, central bank policy, everything.
That's right. And today, that's what we're doing, a deep dive into RE, a concept that really emerged from, the academic wilderness in the 1960s and 70s, and then very quickly became a kind of mathematical wrecking ball.
And it was aimed squarely at the established Keynesian consensus of the time.
Our mission today is to really unpack this theory, how it was first conceived by John F. Muth, how heavyweights like Robert Lucas and Thomas Sargent developed its most terrifying implications for central bankers, And then, where its very idealistic assumptions inevitably collide with the chaotic reality of human behavior.
Our sources today trace this whole evolution, from its academic birth to how it's used in policy modeling today. At its core, rational expectations is really an approach that tries to figure out macroeconomic consequences. We're talking things like inflation and unemployment by looking at how rational, forward-looking people make their decisions.
Based on all available knowledge.
Based on all available knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack that core mechanism a little bit more, because when we say rational, we're talking about something more than just, common sense.
It's much more specific. We're talking about individuals who, on average, use every single scrap of publicly available data, every prevailing economic theory, to form their expectations about what's going to happen next.
And the key characteristic here is what?
It's the elimination of systematic error. So, if you make a prediction about next year's inflation, you might be wrong. A sudden global event, a shock, could throw it off.
Sure. But your error won't be consistently in one direction. You won't always be underestimating inflation, for example. Rational agents learn, and they adjust their models instantly. Their predictions are, on average, unbiased. They're perfectly informed.
This whole paradigm shift, from agents who learn slowly to agents who anticipate instantly, it really was a necessary response to a crisis, wasn't it? The idea itself actually predates the crisis, coming from John F. Muth's seminal 1961 paper.
Right. Rational expectations and the theory of price movements. Muth laid the conceptual groundwork. He basically argued that if people know how the economy works and they know how the central bank is going to respond to certain things, they'll factor that expected response into their decisions right now.
But the theory really blew up in the 70s.
It did.
Why then? Because that's when the dominant economic models of the mid-century, which were largely based on Keynesian ideas, just failed spectacularly. The 70s brought us stagflation.
High inflation and high unemployment at the same time.
At the same time. The old models, which suggested this neat trade-off between the two, they just couldn't explain it.
Right.
So economists needed a radically new way to model how people behave. And that's where Robert Lucas and Thomas Sargent came in. And they turned Muth's concept into the mathematical foundation of what we now call New Classical Microeconomics.
So to really appreciate just how audacious rational expectations was, we have to look back at the model it was trying to replace. Adaptive expectations. AE.
Adaptive expectations was the standard for decades. It was how we modeled the way people predicted things, especially inflation. And it was simple.
How simple?
Your expectation for future inflation was based only on what inflation was in the recent past. You were essentially just looking in the rearview mirror.
And that seems logical. On the surface, we all use history as a guide. But the critical flaw, the one that the RE theorists just ruthlessly exposed, was that under AE, people were basically doomed to be systematic losers.
That is the crucial distinction. I mean, think about it. If the economy entered a long period of accelerating inflation, say it goes from 2% to 4%, then to 6%.
Under the old model.
The adaptive expectations model dictates that agents would always predict something lower than the actual rate. They are systematically underestimating the cost of living year after year after year.
It's like the difference between a novice chess player and a grandmaster.
Good analogy.
The novice only looks at the opponent's last move and is just constantly reacting. But the grandmaster is thinking 5, 10 moves ahead, factoring in the opponent's whole strategy. And economists realize that assuming everyone was an eternal novice was, well, it was irrational.
Right. A truly rational person would learn from those mistakes. They'd see the accelerating trend and adjust their expectations upward to account for the government's predictable pattern of policy.
And this realization leads straight to the first, really shocking implication from you, the policy and effectiveness principle.
Exactly. If individuals use all available information to make these unbiased predictions, then predictable government policies just don't work. Why? Because those expectations are already baked in. They're pre-accounted for.
Let's use that analogy you mentioned, the self-fulfilling prophecy, to really illustrate this. How does that anticipation immediately just cancel out the intended stimulus?
Okay, take monetary policy. Let's say the government signals or just follows a predictable rule that when unemployment gets high, the central bank will increase the money supply to try and stimulate growth.
Okay, a standard playbook move.
A standard move. But if agents are rational, they immediately anticipate the outcome of that predictable action. They think, here comes the inflation.
So before the central bank even does anything, what happens?
Businesses and workers factor in that expected inflation. Workers go to their bosses and immediately demand higher nominal wages to maintain their real purchasing power. Businesses start raising their prices for goods and services to protect their profit margins.
And this all happens just based on the expectation.
Just on the expectation, this simultaneous adjustment of wages and prices completely offsets the potential stimulus. The real purchasing power of any new money that gets printed is neutralized before it even hits the street.
It's a classic case of preemption. The expected policy has already created its inflationary effect. That's self-fulfilling prophecy, before the policy can create any real economic benefit in terms of output or jobs.
And Robert Lucas, he took this idea and just ran with it, formalizing it in his major works in the 70s. He focused heavily on this concept of the neutrality of money.
Okay, for our listeners, let's just clarify that distinction between nominal and real variables. It's so central to Lucas's argument.
Sure, so a nominal variable is just measured in current prices. Think of your dollar wage, or the price you see for a gallon of gas. A real variable is adjusted for inflation. It represents your actual purchasing power or physical output.
Like the number of cars a factory produces or what your salary can actually buy you.
Exactly. And pre-Lucas, Keynesian models accepted that in the short run, monetary policy could affect those real variables. It could increase output, lower unemployment, because prices and wages were thought to be sticky. They were slow to adjust.
Right.
But Lucas argued that when individuals hold rational expectations, that stickiness just vanishes, at least for any anticipated policy. When the central bank predictably changes the money supply, agents immediately adjust their expectations for future prices, and they adjust their nominal wages and prices right now.
Not a year from now.
Right now. This immediate adjustment, based purely on the anticipation of the change, completely eliminates the expansionary effect on real variables like output and employment.
And that is the core takeaway of Lucas's neutrality argument. Predictable changes in the money supply are argued to have no real effects on the economy. The outcome is purely inflationary, zero impact on real activity.
It was a devastating conclusion for policymakers who relied on that kind of discretionary, predictable policy to fine-tune the economy. Lucas was essentially telling them, stop trying to trick the public.
Because you can't.
Because you can't. A stable, low inflationary monetary policy that is consistent with rational expectations will be far more effective than trying to exploit these perceived short-term trade-offs that don't actually exist.
This brings us to the moment rational expectations became, as I said before, a mathematical hammer. And it completely negated what had been the primary policy menu for decades. The Phillips curve.
Ah, the Phillips curve, yes. That inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. It was the intellectual backbone of policy in the 1960s.
Want lower unemployment.
Just accept a little more inflation. I want to fight inflation. You had to accept a little higher unemployment. It offered this exploitable short-run trade-off.
The rise of stagflation in the 70s already proved this trade-off was unstable. But rational expectations provided the devastating theoretical proof of why it collapsed entirely. And this is where Thomas Sargent's work becomes so essential.
Sargent applied RE to analyze fluctuations in the real interest rate and, importantly, the natural rate of unemployment. He really reinforced this concept of the natural rate, which today we often call the NARU, the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment.
And the natural rate isn't some fixed number, right? It's determined by structural factors. What kind of factors are we talking about here?
We're talking about everything that governs the long-term efficiency of the labor market. So, minimum wage laws, unionization rates, how well workforce skills match the jobs available, regulations on hiring and firing. It's the basic efficiency of information flow between employers and job seekers.
So it's the rate of unemployment the economy settles at when it's in a kind of structural equilibrium, not in a cyclical boom or bust.
Precisely.
So if the government tries to use expansionary policy to push unemployment below this natural structural rate, Sargent argues it's not only temporary, but immediately self-defeating.
Absolutely. Policies designed to push unemployment below the natural rate will only succeed if they manage to surprise the public. If the policy is predictable, rational agents anticipate the coming inflation. And because they're rational, they demand immediate adjustment in wages and prices, which moves the economy instantly back to the natural rate, but now at a higher level of inflation.
The long-run effect is instantaneous.
It's instantaneous.
This is where we see the mathematical rigor of RE just to completely negate the Phillips curve. The distinction between the short run and the long run is, for any anticipated policy, nullified.
Yes. And if we delve into the theoretical modeling just for a moment, the math makes it very clear where that policy effect just vanishes. The theory says that the actual price, or the actual inflation rate, let's call it dollars, will equal the rational expectation of that price, $, plus an unforeseeable random error term, which we call epsilon.
So PP plus epsilon. The expectation, $, is based on all public info and the true economic model. And that error term, epsilon, is truly random. It averages out to 0 over time.
Critically, deviations of the actual economy from its expected long-term equilibrium only happen because of that random error term, epsilon dollars. Since rational agents have already factored every predictable piece of policy into pause, any real-world policy effect has to be contained only within that residual unforeseeable shock.
And this realization formed the basis for the policy ineffectiveness proposition, which was developed rigorously by Sargent and Wallace. Let's just walk through the core logic of that mathematical derivation just to see how that anticipation causes the cancellation.
Okay, so we start with the inflation equation. The actual inflation rate depends on predictable factors, like the predictable part of money supply growth, let's call that $1 for past monetary policy, and other structural variables, $6, plus that unavoidable random shock, epsilon.
When rational agents form their expectations, they're looking at that equation. They know $. They can predict the average outcome perfectly. But that unpredictable element, epsilon, has an expected value of 0, so it just drops out of their expectation equation.
Correct. The expected inflation rate, or expected dollars, is based only on the predictable element, $, and $6. The public knows the average effect of the policy, so they factor that average inflationary consequence in immediately.
Okay, now we bring in the expectations augmented Phillips curve. This equation says that the unemployment rate, $20, will deviate from the natural rate, $1, only when actual inflation is greater than expected inflation.
Yes. The bigger the surprise, the bigger the difference between dollars and dollars, the lower the unemployment rate. This is the critical step. The old Phillips curve allowed for policy manipulation here. But under RE, we substitute our two equations into the Phillips curve.
We substitute the actual inflation and the expected inflation equations. And since top yoke yield P plus epsilon, when you look at that deviation term, minus $, is the only thing left.
Only the random error term, epsilon. All the predictable policy terms, the $1 and the 6, they were in both equations, so they just cancel each other out algebraically when you take the difference.
The policy effect just vanishes. The final derived equation for the unemployment rate, $2, shows that it is determined solely by constants, the natural rate, and that random error term, epsilon.
That is the policy ineffectiveness proposition in its purest form. Predictable policy, whether it's expansionary or contractionary, can only influence the nominal side of the economy prices, but it cannot systematically cause unemployment to deviate from the natural rate.
Any deviation is just noise. It's just a random shock.
It's just a random shock. Now, the sources provide a second, slightly more nuanced derivation that confirms this, even when policy is based on current variables rather than just past ones. That one acknowledges that the central bank sets its policy rule based on feedback from the current state of the economy. So we introduce another term, $, which is the current unpredictable change in the money supply. The total monetary change is still a predictable rule plus this shock, $.
So the policy rule itself might be complex, based on GDP gaps or unemployment rates, but the rule is known to the public. The only truly unpredictable part is that current shock or other random market noise.
Exactly. And when you substitute this more complex rule-based policy back into the framework, the result is identical. The public anticipates the rule-based predictable part of the policy. That gets fully incorporated into Pollars. When you solve for the real outcome unemployment, all the predictable policy terms cancel out again.
So it provides this robust mathematical support for the idea that real economic changes movements away from the natural rate only happen if policies are completely unanticipated. They have to be discretionary, random, or if, and this is a big if, prices and wages aren't fully flexible, contrary to the assumptions.
And this fundamentally altered the role of the central bank. It's what we call the Lucas critique. It says that traditional economic policy analysis fails because it assumes economic relationships, like the Phillips curve, stay stable even when policy changes. It ignores the fact that people will change their behavior, their expectations, when the policy environment changes.
So if a central bank wants to have a real effect on jobs, it has to act in a way that is essentially irrational from the perspective of its own long-term credibility. It has to be unpredictable.
Right, which means sacrificing the very transparency that modern governance demands. It turns monetary policy into a strategic game.
A game where the only way to win is often to be surprisingly deceptive. That mathematical rigor really secured rational expectations place as the bedrock of new classical macroeconomics. It dominated thought from the late 70s onward.
But the theory has faced, well, substantial and fundamental criticisms.
Oh, absolutely, because the leap from these mathematically elegant assumptions to the chaotic messiness of the real world it's immense. The main friction seems to be the incredibly demanding assumptions about human behavior and how we process information. We're assuming the individual is this ideal Homo economicus, a being who is almost omniscient when it comes to economic theory.
Let's start with the practical constraints. What does Ari demand of just an average person in terms of information and processing power?
It seems like it demands near perfection.
It does. The theory implies that individuals reach a fixed point where their expectations about aggregate economic variables are, on average, correct, because they're all using the single best possible model of the economy. Just think about the sheer volume of data you'd need to understand. Global supply chains, inflation drivers, fiscal policy rules. It's staggering.
And the critique is pretty simple. The average person just does not have the time or the computing power or access to the proprietary models that the Fed or the Treasury use.
Exactly. Critics argue that the gap between the idealized agent and the actual agent is just too wide to make Ari a reliable foundation for all macroeconomic analysis. Real-world agents suffer from what's called bounded rationality.
They use shortcuts.
They use heuristics, rules of thumb, and they suffer from plain old human error and cognitive biases. To assume everyone is using the best available economic theory is an idealized view that ignores the reality of limited attention and expertise.
And this feeds directly into the problem of what you call misspecification and model agreement.
Yes, if rational expectations is true, all agents must be operating with a common understanding of the underlying economic model they use to make predictions. If the model the agents are using, their shared mental map of the economy, is wrong,
Or if the government's model is wrong.
then perfectly rational expectations formed within that flawed model can lead to systemically incorrect predictions about the actual economy.
So even if everyone is brilliant, if they're all following a map that has a fatal flaw, they'll all just march confidently into the wrong territory together. And given that economists themselves are constantly debating which models are most accurate, Keynesian, new classical, new Keynesian, it's a huge stretch to assume billions of people are all aligned on the one true model.
And what's more, the economic model itself might be structurally unstable. It might be evolving. If the rules of the game are constantly changing, say, due to new technology or geopolitical factors, agents might never be able to converge on a stable, shared expectation.
One of the most compelling real-world critiques against RE is just its inability to explain things we see over and over again in financial history.
Yeah.
These massive market deviations that seem fundamentally, well, not rational.
Right. This brings up the question of irrational bubbles and crashes. If agents are perfectly rational, using all available information to predict future asset values, then phenomena like the dot-com bubble of the late 90s or the 2008 housing crisis, they just shouldn't happen.
Because if asset prices, say housing or stocks, are clearly getting way higher than their fundamental rational value, a perfectly rational agent would see that divergence immediately and start selling, right? Which would prevent the bubble from ever inflating so much.
That is the logical conclusion of Ari. Yet, these events driven by herd behavior, fear, manic exuberance, they are very real. They are massive deviations from equilibrium. And they strongly suggest that behavioral economics, which studies how psychological factors cause predictable irrationalities, gives us a much better explanation for how asset prices move than strict rational expectations theory does.
People aren't just factoring in data, they're factoring in the expected irrationality of other people.
Precisely.
We should also address the limited scope of the empirical evidence. I mean, it's a powerful theory, but how does RE hold up when we actually try to measure what people expect?
The empirical support is mixed. It's limited. Surveys consistently show that people are forward-looking. They aren't stuck in that backward-looking trap of adaptive expectations.
Okay, so that part is right.
That part is right. However, those same surveys rarely show the perfect, unbiased, mathematically rigorous forecasting ability that RE demands. It seems people are partially rational, they incorporate some information, but they're bounded by costs, effort, and bias. The real world seems to exist in this gray area, where the assumptions of RE are an ideal, not a description.
And finally, let's just revisit the ethical or practical policy criticism related to distributional effects.
Right. Rational expectations theory focuses almost entirely on aggregate outcomes. The models worry about what happens to total GDP, total employment, overall inflation. It's a very high level macro focus. And critics point out that this intense focus often fails to pay enough attention to the distributional effects of economic policies.
Can you give us an example of how that aggregate neutrality can hide some significant pain?
Sure. Consider a policy that is perfectly anticipated, and so, according to Ari, neutral. It causes 5% inflation but zero change in real GDP or employment. On paper, the aggregate outcome is neutral, but that 5% inflation might absolutely crush fixed income earners and savers, while heavily leveraged homeowners and borrowers might benefit.
So the policy is neutral in total, but it's drastically shifted wealth and opportunity from one group to another.
Exactly. And Ari's intense focus on reaching that macro equilibrium tends to gloss over these micro-level consequences, which are often the true political and social drivers of policy decisions.
Okay, so to summarize our deep dive here,
Rational expectations was a direct response to the crisis of the 1970s. It fundamentally changed macroeconomics by asserting that people are forward-looking learners who actively anticipate and try to neutralize predictable policy. It successfully challenged and really ultimately replaced adaptive expectations by establishing the mathematical impossibility of systematic exploitable error.
and the real power of RE lies in that policy ineffectiveness proposition. It demonstrates that if agents are rational and fully informed, predictable monetary policy can't manipulate real variables like output and unemployment. It only results in inflation. It basically tore up the exploitable short-run Phillips curve trade-off.
And understanding RE is vital because it really explains the new classical view of the economy. It forces policymakers to realize that they have to act with credibility and stability. Any attempt at fine-tuning through anticipated changes will just be negated by market expectations.
But, as we've also highlighted, its Achilles heel is that assumption of an omniscient, error-free homo economicus. The real world suggests people use shortcuts, they often follow the herd, and they frequently operate with flawed models, which leads to things like market crashes that strict RD just cannot explain.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. If the policy ineffectiveness proposition is correct, and predictable transparency paralyzes the ability of central banks to influence the real economy, does that imply that achieving economic stability or fighting a genuine recession requires policymakers to deliberately act in ways that are surprising and unpredictable, sacrificing transparency for effectiveness?
Or maybe, if we accept the evidence of these recurrent irrational financial bubbles and just the sheer complexity of real-world information gathering, should we conclude that rational expectations is ultimately not a description of human behavior at all, but rather an elegant mathematical ideal that future economic research just has to move beyond? What does your internal economic predictor tell you?